Well, it's good to see all of you. Thank you for coming and being with us. My name is Tom Childers. I live in Henderson, Tennessee. I have worked at Freed-Hardeman. I did the lectureship book, did the page layout for 27 years, 22 with David, and then 5 with Doug Burleson. And I also do the page layout for the lectureship book here. So I still work with David Leip. So pray for me if you will. I lost my wife 3 years ago, so I'm a widower. She was the voice of Freed-Hardeman. She was the Welcome Center coordinator at Freed-Hardeman. And of course, I miss her, but I can talk about her without crying now. So I'm pleased with the progress I'm making from that standpoint. But I have been interested in the restoration movement. I went about 1975 to Cane Ridge. So you're going to Cane Ridge. So I've actually got some of the cane. I don't know that you want to do this, but one of the trips I went up there, I asked, they've got a big patch of cane out close to where the building is, and I said, can I get a little bit of that? And they said, sure. So I've got it. It's isolated on one side of my house, but and there's a concrete driveway, so it can't jump the driveway, but I mean, it keeps on growing. So you probably don't want to get any, but anyway, I've got some that I dug some up, and I've got Cane Ridge cane growing in my beside my house. Yeah, and I also we went over to Bethany, and I got some of the roses out by the museum. I guess that's what they call it now, but they didn't make it. So for some reason, I didn't have good luck with those. But anyway, I wanted to just kind of go over a few things. By the way, I preach at Finger, Tennessee, and that's about 10 miles south of Henderson, and we work with college students. I work with Earl Edwards, who's a retired professor. He turned 90 last April 13th, and I'll turn 80 May the 5th. So we're not as young as we used to be, but we're still very active, and it's a blessing to work with the college kids. We have a number of college kids that come because they are accustomed to smaller congregations, and they want to come and participate, and they want to be members and active and working that sort of thing. So it's really a blessing to be able to work with the college young people and see them grow and mature, and we of course have to say goodbye to them. They tend to graduate, but anyway, they oftentimes will come back to see us, so we're grateful for that. Probably about 10 years or so ago, I was a late comer on Facebook. I just didn't see any value in it, and some people still don't see any value in it. But I got involved in it primarily because I wanted to stay in contact with my family. My brother was in the military. He's now a retired colonel, and he just went all over the place. And he's 8 years younger. That's one disadvantage. But we just didn't have that much contact. But now I'd say since I've gotten on Facebook, I've had 100 times more contact with him than I did in times past. But I started just gathering a group of people interested in the restoration movement, and we had 15 or 20 or something like that. And then we got some people involved that really was excited about it. So now we have, well, I'll show you in a minute. We have almost 6,000 members. And I want to read you the policy to show you how that I think why it's been as successful as it is. The second paragraph says the purpose of the Friends of the Restoration Movement. And by the way, that's what we call this track. We have it at Faulkner. We have it at Freed-Hardeman. We used to have it at Heritage. And of course, we have had it here for, I guess, 8 years. So the purpose of the Friends of the Restoration Movement Facebook page is to emphasize the fun side of history. You're encouraged to post photographs, ask questions, share information, etc. in a kind and respectful way. We want to encourage others to study and enjoy restoration history. This page is not to argue, debate, attack, or highlight the worst side of any man or woman's character, living or dead. We're not opposed to debate or argument, but this page is simply not the forum for that activity. It is not the place to argue politics or of any party, nor is it a place to push a special agenda or hobby. Therefore, we reserve the right to remove anyone's post that we think may be problematic, off topic, or violate our stated goals. Removing a post is not intended to be an attack on upon the poster, nor a reflection upon their character. It is simply saying the post does not fit our stated goals. And so we have people that want to promote gospel meetings. We're not opposed to gospel meetings. We make that statement very clear. We applaud all efforts promoting gospel works. Please refrain from posting announcements about lectureships, gospel meetings, sermon topics, or any other matter unrelated to the Restoration Movement as stated in our policy. Because we have quite a number of people who are members of the Christian church, because after all, some of them are interested in Restoration Movement as well. So it's not just those who are members of Churches of Christ. We have others that are involved. And so we have, let me see if I can show you some of the photographs. There are usually some quite interesting things. One of the things we do, we post the birthdays of known gospel preachers as far back as we can get them. We also, more and more, we're posting the passing of people. There's a photograph announcing the passing, well, I think it's the video that the funeral home did in the memory of Robert Taylor. He spoke here often at the lectureship. And there are sermon charts that sometimes are posted. Sometimes people will post, they will scan books, and there's just all sorts of documents, and I'm not sure what that guitar and all of that is. Sometimes we'll have people that will want to become a member, and the first thing they do is they will post some off-the-wall kind of thing. And so, but if you post something and it starts a debate, and people start arguing and attacking, guess what? Boom, it's gone. I don't mind doing it, and I do it pretty quickly. And what that does is, and I can keep up with the statistics of the number of people that will come back to it. So our retention, people can sign up for this, and some of them are members of 70 or 80 different groups. That kind of scares me when I approve of somebody that's that, because how can you be involved and keep up with that many groups? Well, sometimes people just get on for personal reasons to push your agenda. And so we take a look at that. We have some questions. So you can read this. Anybody can read it. But if you want to be able to post anything or ask a question, then you have to actually become a member. It doesn't cost anything, and we freely share information. But there's some interesting questions that are posted, and we try to help people from that standpoint. Also have a website. And the purpose of this website is I try to preserve and digitize materials of the Restoration Movement among Churches of Christ. And so I have the Gospel Advocate all the way back from 1855 to 1963. That's in public domain. We have the Firm Foundation. It's out of print now. It's default, and we have it from 1884. The first project I did was The World Evangelist, Basil Overton. Let's see, he started, I think, in 1970, something like that, and went 2004. So that was a challenge because his was a tabloid, and we have to, he bought me, this was 20-something years ago, he bought me a scanner that cost $2,700 because it had to be wide to do, you had to do one sheet at a time. And so that was quite a challenge. So my purpose is, if it's a book or if it's an old book or something like that, or if it's a cassette tape, or I've converted a lot of reel-to-reel debates. I have about 400 or 500 debates. Some of them are audio, some of them are books. And so anything like that, we try to, and there are others that are doing the same thing. And so we're trying to preserve the history of the Restoration and of the Restoration Movement. So we're going to talk about two people today. I want to talk about James L. Davis. And I was talking with Bill earlier. I really should have gotten a list of people that fit into the category of the mountain preacher. but I didn't do that. I've actually only got 2 people. This is an older one, and the reason we know he's a mountain preacher is because there's a book entitled The Mountain Preacher, and it's his autobiography. So he owns up to that. Now, let me put a disclaimer here. We're not making fun of anybody. I don't intend to make fun of how people talk. I think it's really unique and special and really beautiful the way some of these people talk. I mean, they've got their own way of expressing things, and I'll share some of that with you. And we're not doing that to make fun of anybody. But you can't have a laugh sometimes but we're not laughing at these folks. We're just understanding this is the way that they talked, at least in certain periods of time. Another one that I want to deal with is, and that's an interesting name. His name was Vernon Mullins, but I guess on his birth certificate was Mount Vernon. So I don't know how he got that name, but he died in about 24 years ago. So this man is a more recent one, but I'll tell you about him. Well, let's see, I think I'm going to start with him first. I was somewhere, I think maybe Scott Harp and Wayne Kilpatrick and I were traveling, and we stopped at the congregation and we worshiped with them, and we told people, some of the people, what we were doing. Basically, we don't do it after COVID. We haven't done it quite as consistently, but what the 3 of us do, back in 2005, I organized a bus trip to go to Cane Ridge and Bethany. I did that when I was working at Freed Hardeman. And then we did another one in 2008. There was a member of the church in Olive Branch that was good about that. She could get first-class motels at a good price. And I mean, she really cut the corners from that standpoint, saved us a lot of money. She would arrange the whole thing, and we would just take folks and have a good time. Well, what we found out, it was, especially with the gas prices, it was very difficult to get enough people. People would want to go, but they couldn't go at that particular time. And so what Scott and I and Wayne decided to do, well, we're just going to get into our van or into our vehicle, and we're going to go for 4 or 5 days. And we're going to go to a certain area. And there was an advantage of that in that we could get up at daylight and go to dark and take a lunch with us and come in and eat. And we could go like that for 3 or 4 days. But if you've got people that are slow about walking and they got to stop every 50 miles, for the restroom break, that kind of, you don't get very much done that way. So we did that. As one trip we went 2,000 miles round trip. And so we were visiting somewhere, and this person asked me, said, have you ever heard of Vernon Mullins? And I said, no, I've never heard of him. So what they did, they said, well, we will give you copies of his tape. And let me switch gears here and go to it. What he did, let's see if I've got, no, I don't think I have it open. What he did, people asked him to write a book about his life, all of his experiences as a preacher. And I'm thinking the way he went about this is probably a good way to do it. He had done radio work he ended up doing it for 50 years. When he does this, he had been doing it 45, 46 years. So what he did, he'd take his equipment and he would do a 30-minute just describing his life from beginning all the way through. And so, I mean, if you're traveling, like I've got a 4.5-hour trip to make it just a little while, I'll put on Vernon Mullins, and boy, he keep you awake, and it's entertaining. And but what it does is it makes you appreciate what people went through in order to preach the gospel. And I think that kind of thing would be beneficial for our young people. It's beneficial for all of us. So I want to play just a few. I'm tempted to play the whole thing, but he's got 6 hours of it. And if you want a copy of it, just let me know, and I'll be glad to share it with you, send you a link to Dropbox or something like that. But I want to play, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes. Maybe this, Alan, let me do. He would always start his radio program with a song. So as he's telling his story, he picks out a song that kind of goes along with what he's going to talk about. So you can listen to the music and the singing and tell a little bit about what his background is. I think he was born in he was a West Virginia preacher, so.
Back to our childhood days and the numerous changes since then. When we were together, our burdens were light. We were happy the whole day long. We'd gather around the old fireplace at night and mingle our voices in song. No breakers in the sunset, and over rain will soon be running yet. As the sun was happy and free in the house where I was born upon a blind.
People watching this are not going to expect this when they see the mountain preacher, I don't think.
Now awake at the 5 o'clock, we will come from God, the Lord of all. Now
Whoops, sorry.
I'm expecting to meet all.
Did they what?
Did he have his own singers?
I'm not sure. Well, let's see. I think he does tell in the tape. Yes, he tells in the tape who the singers are, and one of them, as I recall, is his niece.
Okay.
So they are not they're not a college group or something like that. They are members of the church, and they're his kin.
Good singers.
Yeah. And every one of them's different.
Again, and there will be sunrise for me. If some other loved one should wander in sin, be lost in the darkness and cold, Lord, grant that we seek till we find them again, and bring them safe into the fold. Be kind to the
I'm going to
expecting
fast forward.
Story that I've been presenting to you, and that is the story of my life. Now this will be chapter 4, and I would like for you to go back, just rewind your tape, and play that old song again, and notice all the memories that it brings back, especially if you are as old as I am, or maybe older. We closed our third chapter when I
He's
spoke
like
about going to
73
the
or
hospital,
4 years old. So
and stayed there for 18 days. And then when I came back from the hospital, I wanted to tell you what I began to do then. But before I do that, I think it's fitting here to tell you about my first Bible that I bought and how that it was paid for. You know, I told you how hard the times were back then. But I saw the Thompson New Chain Reference Bible that a preacher had, and I fell in love with that Bible. I'm still in love with it. That's the only kind that I've ever used from the time that I started preaching. But I want to tell you how I got the Bible. I wrote that company a letter in Indiana. I asked them to send me the price of the Bible and the terms. They wrote me back a nice letter and gave me the price of the Bible and the Bibles, different prices, but they said the terms are strictly cash. Well, that knocked me out as far as paying cash for the Bible, because I didn't have the money. But I wrote them back a nice letter, and I told them that I wanted one of those Bibles, and I told them how that I wanted to buy it. And the one that I selected was $15.85. I told them if they would send me that Bible, I would pay them $4 down and $4 a month until the Bible was paid for, and I would sign any kind of a paper that they would send me to insure them with their money. They wrote me back a nice letter. They said, Mr. Mullins, we're going to send you that Bible on your terms, but you treat the matter confidentially. I got my Bible. Now I want to tell you how that I paid for it. My mother had a big red sow, and that sow had a litter of pigs. My mother sold those pigs for $2 each and helped me pay for my Bible. That's the way I got it. I wore that Bible out. And when I wore it out, I gave it to my oldest daughter. And when I say it was wore out, it was. Had many battle scars on it. I gave it to her. She still has it. And she cherishes that Bible to this day. The second one I wore out, I gave that to my second daughter. And I gave my third daughter one. I'm on my fourth one now. And this goes to my baby daughter, to the youngest one at my death. So I just want to tell you how that I got that Bible and how that I paid for it.
Okay, we'll stop there. But it's he tells about his preaching. He tells about experiences. He tells where he preaches. He tells about threats on his life. A lot of times we don't think about that kind of situation, but this preacher, Vernon Mullins, and others were under threat of their lives if they continued to preach. So, but especially the one that I'm going to show you now. This is, let me see, I want to go.
Could I ask you a question?
Yes, sir, yes.
Who was doing the threats? Who was threatening them? Was it denominational people? Or was it
Yes, a lot of times it's denominational people. Sometimes it's people, members of the lodge. It's just, but it's a lot of times denominational people. Yeah, but now we're going to run into a guy that's, or I'm going to introduce you to a guy that it's it's unreal. I wish I could share all the things about that, but. This book is not about, but just a few pages. It's about 70 pages or so long. So let me show you the beginning of this book. His name is James L. Davis, and this book is entitled The Mountain Preacher. And so I want to read a few things about it. That's what it looks like. It was printed in 1909. And that's a picture of him holding a Bible. And it's F.L. Rowe. He printed quite a few books by members of the church. And he says, "Dear reader, will you please be introduced to this peculiar piece of literature?" And that's the way he describes it. It is peculiar. It is intended to enlarge our sympathies for the true and tried missionaries in our own country, those who are able and willing to preach to the rich will find plenty of substantial sympathy. But those who go and labor among the destitute, depraved, and uncultured often meet with difficulties unknown to our most prosperous brethren. The writer of this sketch is personally acquainted with Brother J. L. Davis and his family, and having been with him in meetings in the mountains of Kentucky. His fight has been hard, but his victories have been glorious. With a ready memory, a native ability, splendid social powers, strong faith, undaunted courage. Now, you talking about somebody has got a lot of courage. This man has. Untiring energy. He has shown what the Word of God can do in the hands of a man without an education. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about a mountain preacher and somebody that has limited educational opportunities. May God's, I want to make sure to get this in. He is our second raccoon of Kentucky. He's talking about Raccoon John Smith. And you go to Cane Ridge, you'll see, let's see, that's where he's buried, isn't it? Yes, Raccoon John Smith. He's buried there. So you have, here you have a man described as our second. So may God speed this book, The Mountain Evangelist, on its way to bless hundreds and thousands of readers. And this is Thaddeus S. Hudson. And I don't remember much about him, except I do know that I have some information about where he's buried and that sort of thing on Find a Grave. By the way, I have about 6,000 preachers on Find a Grave. that are labeled as members of the church or before 1900 of the Christian church. So I've been doing that for a long period of time, researching, finding out where preachers are buried. One of the most exciting things that I can do is I will be visiting a cemetery and it'll say a gospel preacher. And I don't know who it is, but what I'll do is I'll go home and research. Now, sometimes gospel preacher can be referred to any preacher, but quite often it's referred to members of the church. In the last few years, here's another statement. I have been with Brother Davis in meetings in the mountain section of Kentucky. It is wonderful what a great influence he has over these people. I was glad to be among them and confirm the word that our brother preached with such power and boldness. The mountain people have always interested me. They seem to enjoy hearing the preaching of the gospel more than people in our own sections. It would do careless Christians good to see how they attend meetings. Now, I will add that I, along with my wife, went on a mission trip. I think this was maybe in 1968. I'd only been preaching for a couple of years. And so we went to Hazard, Kentucky, in coal mining country. And we were just impressed with people there. I remember knocking on a door, and this would have been probably in June or July, and it was a screen door, and I knocked on the door, and I heard a voice from way back in the kitchen, "Come on in." Well, you know, you don't do that around here, I don't think, but up there back then, and probably one of the most interesting things, we were eating breakfast in downtown Hazard, I think, one morning. And well, no, I'll tell you when it was, because this was, do you remember when the moon flight, when man landed on the moon? What date was that? July the 11th, 1969, as I recall. And so it would have been a little bit after that. It had been a week or two after that. But here are a group of 3 or 4 men sitting around the table, and they're talking about the book of Revelation. And they're talking about, well, you know, those fellows, they were not the first one on the moon. And so they knew that we were in town with knocking on doors and having a gospel meeting. So one of them walked over to us and said, "Where's that passage in the scriptures where you have an angel that has 1 foot on the earth and 1 foot on the moon," or something like that? And so we said, "Well, Revelation so-and-so." And this man said, "Now, see right there, I told you that the United States, those astronauts were not the first one on the moon." So, but they were very religious people. And our experience was that you would run into people who a lot of times were holiness people, but they would say there's only one church. I mean, they believed that the church they were members of, they basically believed in the Restoration movement from that standpoint. So I've had a little bit of experience. It's been a long time ago, but let me go, well, right here, let's read this statement. I've got it highlighted. He tells about his background, and I'll show a table, a timeline a little bit later on. But he said, this is 1891. He said, "I heard a debate between a gospel preacher and a Methodist." And of course, I'm sure when he heard it, he didn't understand that he was a gospel preacher. It was just between 2 preachers, but after he listened, he learned the difference. So during the debate, I was convinced that there was but one church. After that, my wife and I read the one book as never before. We had a little log cabin, 12 by 14, settling among the hills of Clay County, Tennessee. And it was there that I learned what to do to be saved. And on May the 29th, 1891, I was born again, and then I began to read, to work out my own salvation. I went to writing school for 8 days and learned how to write. In May 1893, I made the first effort to preach the gospel in Pulaski County, Kentucky. Now, I think what he will say is that his wife actually taught him how to read, and so that's before this right here takes place. So I want to go, I think it's page 36, and just read some of the things. And here's some pictures that are in the book. This is 1905. This is in Rock Castle. Let's see, that is that Rock Castle? Is that Illinois? I think that's. I don't think it's Ohio. I think it's. I'll have that down in just a moment where you can see it. So 30. Okay. From there, I went to Mount Vernon, the county seat of Rock Castle County. I began preaching the gospel in the Christian church meeting house. Opposition grew very high. Some cried one thing and some another. You asked the question about where did the persecution come from? Well, here's this man where it's coming from. They began making light of me. The lawyers and doctors began holding counsel. They began to call it strange doctrine. I continued to preach on till the following. Notice how following is spelled. Saturday night. When I first got this book, I thought I was going to do a spell check and correct all the words. And then I realized, no, this is the way they spell, and this is the way. So you want to keep it. So this right here is a picture of it. Basically, this is a picture. So however they spell it, that's the way it is. So he says, they began to call it strange doctrine, and I continued to preach on till the following Saturday night. The number had grown from a few to a house filled. I give an invitation on that night for some to obey the gospel. I looked down the aisle and I seen an aged man coming forward who had come about 15 miles to obey the gospel. Just over his head, a little to the right, was a little bird fluttering around and looked like trying to light in midair. It came on up. The people was singing. It flew around over the organ. Now they're not using the organ, they're in that house and they have one in there. I had taken the old man by the hand and seated him. The little bird flew on the pulpit and onto my Bible with its back to the audience and fluttering its little wings. The audience become confused and several made some foolish remarks. I remarked, ladies and gentlemen, don't allow the little bird to disturb you. It has lit on the only thing that will stand when the heavens and earth are on fire. I had no more than made the remark when the little bird started toward the door, flying over the heads of the people in the center aisle. I supposed it had gone out the door, but to my astonishment, in a few moments, I seen it coming back down the aisle on the other side. One of my greatest opposers had been taking notes. His wife was bitterly opposed to me. She was president of the Ladies' Aid Society and hated me because I told her the truth and would not allow the use of the organ in the worship. The little bird lit on an old man's head. He raised his hand and gently touched it, and it went the second time to my Bible and lit, and began fluttering as it did before. By the time the song had almost ceased, people were getting very nervous. Several women almost fainted. I asked the audience to take their seats, but I never seen the little bird no more. And when I read that, I remembered a similar episode that I had when I preached at Olive Branch, Mississippi. I had bought a brand new suit, and I had it on Sunday morning teaching the Bible class, and it was young married students about my age. I was young then, so people were just whispering and laughing, and I thought, and I'd always been taught, you feel the top of your zipper, especially. So I thought, well, it's still there. There's not any kind of problem. And so after the class is over, my good friend, one of the deacons, came up to me and he said, check your zipper. So I went to the bathroom, and it was a plastic zipper, and it was not unzipped. A brand new suit had popped open. Oh. And I carried that thing back, not right then, but I carried it back later, and I said, I want a new zipper. Well, what the seamstress did, she just put it back together. So I just took it, when I got home with it, I realized what she'd done. I just took it and it just popped open again. So this time I took a pair of scissors and clipped it so that she couldn't put it back together. And I said, I want a metal zipper put in that thing. So after I taught the Bible class, then I go into the auditorium, and the Olive Branch building has got a high ceiling. It's about like what you have here. And there's a little bird flying. And what had happened, well, it was not a little bird, it was a starling that had got in the kitchen vent and had worked its way through. I guess it maybe had hatched out or just got through, and it got through the vent, got in the ceiling, and it worked its way back into the auditorium. They'll work toward light. So when we turn on the lights, here it comes. And I'm preaching, and the bird's flying, and I said, well, between the birds and the flies, I'm not having a good time. So there are some humorous things that take place, but I learned the important lesson that particular day. But let me go a little bit further. He says, so I began preaching the gospel upon the mountains. And as Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I draw all men to me. I did that with all the power that was in me. And in a few nights, his audience had run down very small, and he closed his meeting. He's talking about a preacher that's, I think they're taking turns preaching. One will preach, and so he's talking about that person closing his meeting and went away. The crowds increased upon the hill, and we succeeded in the conversion of several men and women. And about 2 years later, I was called to that place to show why men and women ought not to be nothing but the Church of Christ. The pastor had fled, but after I'd gone, he come in and tried to confuse the minds of people, but to no avail. On the set day for me to show why men and women ought to belong to the Church of Christ, the excitement was running very high. My life was threatened. Men swore that they would shoot me. My brethren, some of them seemed very nervous. They had so arranged that if they was to attempt to assassinate me, that the sisters would surround me, form a chain guard around me, and on the hour set, the people began to come from miles. That was the worst attempt that I ever saw. On the hour set, I went into the stand and read the scriptures and read the following texts, Luke 12:2 and 3 and 4. For there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither hid that shall not be known. Therefore, whatsoever you speak in darkness shall be heard in the light, and that which you have spoken in the ear, in the closets, shall be proclaimed upon the housetops. So I began to make known these wonderful truths. I let the men and women know. They seemed to be very nervous. It was thought not less than 50 guns was in the house. I said, ladies and gentlemen, I am here today to tell you the reason of the hope that is in me. With God's word in my hand, for your own good to tell you that if you want to be saved, you must not have fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. They seemed very nervous. I could hardly keep the order for a while. And as I proceeded, they were one of the most terrible, let's see, I guess it should be there, but that's what he says. And as I proceeded, they were one of, and I would say there was one of the most terriblest looking woman that I'd ever seen come into the meeting. She had been in the morning near the meeting house in company with one of the secret order men talking. She was the most filthiest, awful looking woman I've ever seen. The man she talked to come in just ahead of her and taken his seat. In a few moments she came in very dirty and with very few clothes on and walked briskly right up to me as I stood in the stand in the very highest of my discourse and said, Mister, don't you believe that peoples is warned of when they are going to die? I have come for you to tell me. I don't want to die before I get home. And I said, I have a very important subject here under discussion. and I don't wish to be disturbed. Please take a seat, and when I am through, I will talk to you about dying." So he continues, "The sisters made room and seated her, but none of them sat very close to her, for she looked as if she was almost defiled. She would almost defile even the meeting house by sitting on the seat. She might have been drunk." I continued to discourse. Directly I noticed that the man that had come in just ahead of her riz up and walked out. And in a few moments, she riz up and started toward the door. When she got out in the yard, the excitement got very high. Some of my friends went out and ordered her to leave. She declared she was going to begin screaming, and one man told her if she did, he'd kill her. One of my friends, a young man, ran for his wagon and brought it up in a hurry and put her in it and drove her as hard as his team would go for about a mile away in the forest, and dropped her at the side of the road as a man would drop a cat that he didn't need about the house. Then hurried back to the scene to haul off more men or women, either dead or alive, for the threats by this time was running very high. As I'd seen the audience, I began to get very nervous, especially those who was bound by the yoke of bondage. I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand that I'm a candidate for assassination, and if it takes that to establish the truth in this community." They became very nervous and looked at each other, still having their eyes on me in the stand, and sat quiet. I closed my discourse and said, "Now, if there is a man in this audience that can take the Bible and show that man in the author, that God is the author of these institutions, I will submit and say no more. But if you can't, you must submit and forever hold your peace." One poor fellow riz up, a former convert of Reverend Russell of Allegheny, Pennsylvania. He riz in the audience very pale and trembling and said he had a few words to say. And I said, "All right, if you can show me that I'm wrong, I will submit and the fight will stop. If you can show me by the Bible that I'm wrong." I told him to come forward, and he began. He got very nervous, not touching the subject at all, and I called upon the audience if they could explain what he had said in reference to anyone that might be trying to prove I was wrong. Then I says to him, give me verse and chapter for your human organizations or take your seat." And he said, "I was just trying to tell you what Job said." I says, "Are you so excited that you can't tell Solomon from Job? You are reading in Proverbs." He got very nervous and started walking backwards and fell off the rostrum. And as he riz, he started toward the door, forgetting his hat. And I ordered one of the brethren to take his hat to him, and he made his escape. And I said, "If there is another one that wishes to attempt to prove by the scriptures that I'm wrong today, now is your time." Several got up and left the house. I continued the services, and the next day, several made the good confession. Two young men denounced lodgism and is now members of the Church of Christ. So you see a little taste of some of the things he goes through. One of the things that is very clear in this book is that oftentimes some of the very people who are opposed to him and actually are threatening to kill him, what they end up doing is they end up being converted by the gospel. And they begin to be his best friends, and they're the very ones that will protect him from others who are threatening him. So let me, we've got just 2 or 3 minutes left, and let me just go through some of these things that I have on PowerPoint and just show you, we might see something that needs to be emphasized. He was born in 1865 near Chattanooga. He married, Shelmont is kind of west of Chattanooga. He heard his first sermon in 1890. In 1891, his wife taught him to read. In 1891, that's when he heard that debate that we read about. 1891, he's living in Clay County. We read about that. 1891, May the 29th, he obeyed the gospel. He went to writing school for 8 days. He began preaching May the 3rd, 1893. And there's Shelmont. You'll see it right here where the dot is. Chattanooga is over here, and there's where she's from. So he marries a person from that area. Let's see. Here are some of the pictures. That's in Rock Castle.
That county's in Kentucky.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that's he's a farmer. He says this is in the Gospel Advocate 1900, and then he moves up to that's when he goes up into Kentucky, or at least that's where he is during that period of time. And then there are reports about him that what they're doing and so forth in 1905, and he is well, let's see. All right, there we are at the right. I don't know why that didn't show up, but anyway, I can track where he is through going through and looking at some of the Gospel Advocates. One of the things that he does, he has a debate with Taylor, and we found this picture. Well, my screen is not okay. We found this picture up in just across the state line from, well, it's just below Murray. There's some antique shops in there, and a fellow was in there, and he found this picture, and this is C.R. Nickel. And this is the person that he debates, and this is the same person that Davis debates. But that goes to show you, you're looking at a picture, and lo and behold, it's something that's, this was recently found. And so this takes place in 1914. So not Nichols, he's the Texas preacher, without an S, he debates this same man. And so there are reports about that. There's a report that we're the mountain preacher. So he's pretty well tagged as the mountain preacher. They understand him to be that. So you have quite a few things that are being said about him. Our time is just about up. You have any questions or anything? I didn't think I'd have enough material, but it looks like I had more than I had time to cover. But that's oftentimes the way it is. Well, thank y'all very much. We've got 9. This is our biggest crowd. And we're counting 10. We just got 10. Okay. All right. So great.
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
Do you know what the period ending the restoration, what year that you would consider that restoration period? Is it still going on?
Oh, it's still going on. Yes. It's still going on. Because
restoration preachers, we still got them today.
yes. Well, it's anytime you get away from the truth, or you're not obeying the truth or living the truth out. Franklin Hemp had a sermon. He talked about restoring New Testament love. So he basically took the Bible and showed that we have been right about doctrine, but he said one of the things we've been weak on is loving our brethren. So we not only need to restore the Lord's Supper on the first day of the week and restore a cappella singing, but we need to also restore love. So we're going to always have that challenge that it's going to be there. And keep in mind, the restoration movement is not just something that's started by one man. The idea of the restoration, there's a man it's Ralph Gilmore's wife's grandfather. He was from Perry County, Tennessee, and he was a member of a denominational church, but he would take his team of mules and he would plow a while, and then he would rest his mules, and then he would read his Bible. So he heard this preacher preach, denominational preacher, and when he got through preaching, he said, "Preacher, I don't read in my Bible what you just preached." And so the preacher said, "Well, what do you read?" And he said, "I read you have to eat the Lord's Supper on the first day of the week, and you have to be baptized for other mission sins." He just went down. He said, "You sound like a Campbellite." So he said, "What's a Campbellite?" He had never heard a Campbellite preacher. He didn't know what it was. And this preacher said, well, there's a group of them right down the road. And so he goes down. Now, he doesn't learn the truth down there. He learned the truth by reading that Bible in the field, resting his mules. But when he heard that preacher down the road preach, he said, what you preached is what I read here. So you see, it's not so much a man converting you, Alexander Campbell or Barton W. Stone or anybody else. If you read your Bible wherever you are and you say, I want to do what that Bible says, that's restoration. Because remember what Jesus said? The seed is the Word of God. The seed is the Word of God. So that to me is my definition. You know, a lot of times we call it the Stone Campbell movement. That's putting it right here in this little box when it's all over the world, because people all over the world are reading the Bible. And anytime you have people reading the Bible, the seed is being planted. And if you have a honest, not a good, but an honest and good heart, then that's where restoration will flourish. Yes. Pardon? Yes, yes. He's reading the Bible, and he needs some help. And that's what we try to do, is we try to help people. And we're helping ourselves as well. Okay, well, thank y'all for being here. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you.